In this video, we're going to talk about how to estimate square roots. And the square roots that we're going to be looking at are square roots that are not our perfect square root problems. In perfect square root problems, we are able to generate an integer. But in these types of problems, the square root of the numbers that we're looking at are irrational numbers. Those are the kind of numbers that have decimals that go on forever without repeating. So instead of having to use our calculator, we're going to talk about how we could estimate about where these square roots fall. We need to recall first that a perfect square is a number made by squaring a whole number. So this would be like 1 is a perfect square because 1 times 1 is 1. So the square root of 1 is 1. 4 is a perfect square because 2 times 2 is 4. So the square root of 4 is 2. And so on. 3 times 3 is 9. So the square root of 9 is 3. 4 times 4 is 16. So the square root of 16 is 4. If we keep going, 5 times 5 is 25. The square root of 25 is 5. 6 times 6 is 36. So the square root of 36 is 6. 7 times 7 is 49. So the square root of 49 is 7. 8 times 8 is 64. The square root of 64 is 8. 9 times 9 is 81. The square root of 81 is 9. And 10 times 10 is 100. The square root of 100 is 10. And we could keep going if we wanted. We could do 11 times 11, 12 times 12. All of those numbers would be perfect squares. And when we find the square root of a perfect square, our answers are going to be integers. We could also have written, remember, -1, -2, -3, because -1 times -1 is also 1. But usually you're just looking for the principal square root, the positive square root. So in this case, we'll just list the positive square roots. So we're going to use these perfect square numbers to help us estimate square roots with numbers that are not perfect squares. So you can approximate the value of non-perfect squares using what you know about perfect squares. So you should be looking at the perfect squares that we just listed, the first 10 perfect squares, and we can figure out what two perfect squares a number falls between. So, for example, if we wanted to find the square root of 65, doing this, the number that we're going to get is actually an irrational number, and those are numbers that have decimals that go on forever without repeating. They're not easy to work with. They're not pretty numbers. So instead of having to use a calculator, what you're going to have to know how to do is just know around where that number is going to fall. And the way that you can do that is by looking at between which two perfect squares would you find the number 65. So if you look at the numbers above, you should see 1, 4, 9, 16, 25, 36, 49, and so on. The perfect squares that 65 falls between, you should see that it falls between 64 and 81. So the square root of 65 falls between the square root of 64 and the square root of 81. The square root of 64, you should know, is 8, and the square root of 81 is 9. So knowing that, we can say that the square root of 65 falls somewhere between 8 and 9. And that's as far as we're going to have to go today, is just knowing which two numbers the square root would fall between. So the square root of 65 is 8 point something, because it falls between 8 and 9. So let's look at a few more. The square root of 12 is between which two square roots? So look at your first 10 perfect squares that we just listed. You should see that it's falling between the square root of 9 and the square root of 16. And you should know that the square root of 9 is 3 and the square root of 16 is 4. So the square root of 12 falls between the numbers 3 and 4. So it's 3 point something. We'll get more specific tomorrow, but today you just have to know which two numbers it falls between. Square root of 75. Look at your numbers. You should see that the square root of 75 is falling between 64 and 81. So it also, just like the square root of 65, falls between 8 and 9, somewhere between 8 and 9. The negative square root of 29, we're going to have to add a negative here in our two square roots. So the negative square root of 29, don't let the negative change how you're doing it. You're still just going to look at the number 29 and which two perfect squares it falls between. So you should see that it's falling between 25 and 36. And because it's negative, we'll just have to write the negative numbers down. So the integers, the square root of 25 is 5, but it's negative 5, and the square root of 36 is 6. So it falls between negative 5 and negative 6. So it's negative 5 point something. And then same with negative square root of 57. Think of these as negative square roots. But 57, we just look at our first 10 perfect squares. 57, you should see, falls between 49 and 64. So it falls between negative 7 and negative 8. So now it's your turn to show what you understand from what you just watched. The first question is a multiple choice question. You're going to figure out which of those statements is true about the square root of 37. And then you're going to have a free response where Tricia estimates that the square root of 85 is about 8. Do you agree or disagree? And you're going to explain why you agree or disagree with her.